everyone, and welcome to another TAFU talk. If this is your first time joining us, TAFU is short for Teens of Friends United Nature Conservation Organization, and our goal is to join the common objectives of young people and to promote personal responsibility towards nature. Our guest today is Jen Specagna, the Education and Outreach Manager at the Manta Trust. She has been very kind in accepting to talk with us today in the run-up to World Manta Day about mantas, the Manta Trust, their research and their conservation efforts, and most importantly, what we can all do to help. Welcome, Jen. We're very lucky that you could join us today. I'll write down some questions while you're talking, if that's okay, and you guys can do the same. And just write them down in the comments, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. I'll hand it over to you now, Jen.
Thank you so much, Nika, and thank you for that lovely introduction, and to all of you out there who are hopefully listening to us as well. As Nika said, my name is Jen. I'm the Education Manager at the Manta Trust, and yeah, exactly. I'd love to come and talk to you today ahead of World Manta Day that we are celebrating on the 17th of September. And if you are a big manta lover and you're based anywhere in the UK or can get to London, please come and join us for our celebrations. More details on the website if you would like them. Otherwise, I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen, hopefully with you. Let's just grab this up. And can you see that okay, Nika?
Yeah.
Lovely. Let me just see if I can pop it onto slideshow for you. There we go. So yeah, as Nika said, we're going to talk today a little bit about manta rays generally, and a bit about the work that we do about the Manta Trust, just a little bit, and about the threats that they're facing and what we can all do to help. So I'd like to begin by showing you a very short video, which will just introduce the species to you a little bit. I'll just get you looking at them and you'll be able to see them showing some of their natural behavior in the ocean. So let me press play. Okay, so I always just like to start by showing that video because it gives you an impression of the size of the animals and what they really look like and how they're behaving under the water. But I'm sure you noticed as you watched that there was two different types of animals there in the video. So we have on the left-hand side of my screen the manta ray, and there are actually two different species of manta ray currently recognized. We have the reef manta ray, which is the smaller of the two. And when I say smaller, you know, it's still ginormous. We're talking kind of a length of around about 3 or 4 meters from one wing to the other wing, so from one pectoral fin to the other. And the reef manta tends to be a bit more commonly encountered because, as the name implies, it's found in shallower areas in things like coral reefs. And then the other type of manta ray is called the oceanic manta ray, which is the bigger of the two, and it is really a true ocean giant. You know, biggest individuals, you're talking around about 7 meters long from wingtip to wingtip. And again, the name gives the clue, they're found out in more open ocean areas. And then also in the video, you probably notice a smaller animal too, over on the right-hand side, the devil ray. And there are 8 species of devil ray, and they are the manta ray's smaller relative. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go through as well. If you hear me say mobulid, then I'm just talking about manta rays and devil rays all together. It's kind of collective term for them all. And mobulids like manta rays that you see here, they have to swim all the time. They're constantly on the move, they're constantly swimming forward, because without swimming forward, they don't get water over their gills, delivering oxygen to their body. So they need to swim all the time in order to breathe. But even though they have this ginormous size, they really are gentle giants. And they feed just on the tiniest animals out in the water. They feed on plankton, zooplankton, tiny, tiny little species of animal. And if they come across a lovely, nice big patch of zooplankton, they open up those big mouths. And these fins on the front of their head, they're called cephalic fins. They're helping to direct the water into their mouth. And inside, you can just see on my picture here, is all these thin filaments, these things called gill plates that you can see on my image. And you can probably work out what they're for just by looking at the picture here, but they are literally acting like a sieve for the animal. The water is passing through the gill plate and the tiny zooplankton are getting caught up in those thin filaments. Now, take a good look at those gill plates, because we're going to talk about those again a little bit later on in about 10 minutes or so. They're really, really important. So we will come back to those later. But just continuing on the manta ray for a moment. The name manta is a Spanish word. It comes from the word blanket. And it's quite easy to see why when you look at them from up above, like you can see in this picture here. Almost looks like this big, dark blanket just floating through the water. And even though they're so large and charismatic, and actually they have the biggest brain of any fish, they're very socially intelligent, we still actually don't know very much about them. We've only really been studying them in any depth for a couple of decades. So there's an awful lot we don't know that we still need to find out. And if I come back to the devil rays, well, even more so for the devil ray, they are shyer, they're more elusive, they're very, very hard to track. And we know, even less about these different species here. So I thought I'd just take a moment to talk to you a little bit about one of the research techniques that we use at the Manta Trust and other organisations use as well. And it's called photo identification. And, again, as with most of the things, the clue is in the name. You can work out what it is. It's all about the way that we identify different animals from each other, looking at photos of them. We use this technique with the manta ray, but other people might use it with sharks or dolphins or seals or terrestrial animals as well. It's a very, very effective technique, which is also very cost effective, and therefore is a really great technique for people to use. So for the manta ray, the photo we really want to get is one just like you can see on your screen at the moment. We really care about the underside of the manta ray, because on the underside of the animal, they are covered in all of these spots. And every manta ray has a different pattern of spots. Some have very few, some have absolutely loads, just like we have fingerprints unique to us. And so we can look at that photo and work out who is who. And so our researchers, or this could be people on their holidays that encounter manta rays, or it could be people in the local communities that encounter them, what they do is they're swimming down underneath the manta ray and they're taking a photo of the underside. And then that photo goes into our online database. And every manta ray is given an ID number and it's given a name. We've got some quite funny names in our online database. A lot of them are named after food. And we'll note down anything else that we need to know. So we might be able to determine what sex it is, whether it's male or female, and that goes in there. If there's any identifying characteristics like scarring on the body or damage to either pectoral fin, again, that's noted as well. And that means that when our researchers go out again and they gather more photos, they can bring them back and they can look at our online database and they can essentially start playing a big game of spot the difference. They're trying to work out, have we seen that manta before? Is this a new manta that we've never seen before? And by doing this, we can actually find out loads of useful information. So we can start to work out things like how many manta rays live in that area? What is the general population like? What is the sex distribution like? How many males to females do we see? We could work out things like, well, what areas do they use? Are the areas particularly important for feeding, for instance? And when we start to gather all this data and we get an image of what these mantas are doing and how many there are out there, what's happening to the population, that is really then when we can work to protect them. Without knowing, for instance, where they are, what areas are important to them, we then can't work to protect those areas. When we have that information, we can go and get presented to the government, and we can work to protect it from things like fishing and tourism, etc. So on that note, I mentioned kind of protecting these areas. And I just wanted to move on a little bit to talk about threats to these animals and what's kind of happening to them out there in the wide world and what the problems are. And with that, I just wanted to show you a very short video. There's no sound, but it does have some quite graphic images of animals being harmed. And so if you'd rather not see that, just turn away for a moment and I'll let you know when it's done. Otherwise, let's have a watch. Okay, so if you did turn away, you can turn back and I'll just give a very short summary just so you know what kind of thing we've seen. And what we saw there were different species of mobulas being caught and landed and being cut up. And those of you that saw the video will have noticed at the end that they were being cut up for their gill plates, those thin filaments that we saw earlier on in the presentation. And we saw that they were being laid out to dry. And this is actually one of the biggest threats facing the mobulid species today, in that they're being targeted for their gill plates, because those gill plates are being used in traditional Asian medicines, and that's what we can see on the images here. They're dried out and they're put into things like a soup, just like we can see. And it's said that by having this in the soup, it could cure various ailments, all sorts of things, whether it's fever or measles or chickenpox, or even in some claims, things like cancer as well. And there is no scientific basis to that. And this is almost a more recent problem that's come around in more recent decades, mostly due to clever marketing by retailers that say, just like these gill plates can help filter plankton out of the water for the mobulids, well, it can help you filter out toxins and impurities from your body. And with that, I just wanted to show you this image here. So on this image, you can see all of the different species of mobulid. We've got our 2 Manta Rays there, we've got the other species of devil ray. And you can probably quite quickly notice there's something in common with most of them. You can see their conservation status there, and most of them are classified as endangered, with a couple there classified as vulnerable. And when we start to hear more about their life history, it's very, very easy to see why. So all of these species here are very slow growing species. They live to a long age, they grow very slowly. And that means it takes them a long time to get to sexual maturity, to an age where they can reproduce and have young themselves. Every species is different, but let's say, just as a general guidance, maybe it takes them something like 7 years to become sexually mature, to be able to reproduce. And even when they can reproduce, let's take the reef manta. Well, the reef manta will probably only have 1 pup at a time. And she might have 1 pup per year, or it might be more like 1 pup every 2 years or 3 years, or in some locations, maybe 1 pup up to every 7 years. And so when we see that actually it takes them a very long time to be able to reproduce, and they're only going to have 1 pup at a time, and it might just be 1 pup every few years, you can start to see why taking any number of them from the ocean means that the population of them starts to decrease very, very quickly. And earlier we talked about direct fishing. They were directly fished for their gill plates. But here is another problem that they're facing as a result of fishing too, and that is the problem of bycatch. So bycatch, in case you haven't come across the word, is when they've been caught but they weren't the intended catch. So often, I know that I used to hear a lot about things like dolphins being caught accidentally in tuna fisheries. But it's not just dolphins, it could be sharks, it could be things like the manta ray here as well. And bycatch results in thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of manta rays and devil rays being caught up and killed accidentally every year. So there are just a couple of the threats that they're facing. There are others, but these are probably 2 of the biggest threats that they're facing at the moment. So with that, I just wanted to come a little bit to the charity that I work for, which is the Manta Trust, and just introduce them to you a little bit. And the Manta Trust work globally. So I'm just going to put up this image here. So we work in our kind of flagship project in the Maldives, but we also work with affiliate projects all around the globe as well. And actually this image is a little bit out of date. There's a few more than are shown on here, but you can start to see that we really work worldwide, globally, all over the areas where manta rays and devil rays are found. And we work with these projects all around the world to try and make sure that we're all aiming for the same outcome. We're all taking a similar approach in how to do it, and to make sure that projects all have the resources and support that they need in order to do the work that they need to do effectively. And really, we're trying to conserve these animals through 3 different pillars. We've got the pillar of research, we've got the pillar of education, and we've got the pillar of collaboration. Research we looked at a little bit earlier, and we saw why research was so important with the photo ID work. Again, without knowing rough population sizes, without knowing what areas are important, again, we can't really work to conserve them. But education is also really tightly entwined with conservation. Education is all about raising awareness of these animals, raising awareness of the threats that they face, giving people ideas of how they can help. And that can be done on a global scale, but most importantly, done within local communities where these animals are found. And then we've also got collaboration. We just saw an example of collaboration a moment ago with the affiliate projects, working with projects all around the world to share expertise, to guide one another. But collaboration can also be collaboration with governments, helping to get legislation put in place to protect animals, helping to make sure that legislation is enforced. Could be working with local businesses, working with local communities to make sure that they have a say in the project, to make sure that everyone is on board with what is happening. And really through these 3 approaches, that is the only way that this conservation project will work. Before I move on, I just also wanted to mention what you can all do to help too. So you're all listening presumably because you are interested in marine conservation and you care about manta rays and you would like to help. And it often feels like, you know, I'm just one person. What can I do to help? It's a much bigger problem than just me. But there are ways that we can all help. One of the most important, I think, is actually supporting conservation organisations. So if you have an organisation close to you, or even not close to you, but one very close to your heart, supporting the work they do is key. You could support them in lots of ways. It might be just promoting their work, telling your friends about their work, telling your family about their work, you know, getting other people interested, sharing what they do. For other people, it might be directly donating money and fundraising for the charities, helping to raise funds for the work they do. Another thing you could do is we talked earlier about fishing and how fishing was a big threat to mobulids, either directly targeted fishing or indirectly with bycatch. And fishing is a result of human demand, you know, our demand for fish for our own consumption. And so if we are, you know, if you are someone that likes to eat a lot of fish, looking at your consumption can also be a way to help. It might not be about giving it up completely, but can you reduce your fish consumption? Also, meat consumption as well also plays into this. Can you have more days of the week which are vegetarian days or vegan days? Again, these can all help as well. And then with that, I just wanted to finish by showing you one last video, which should just illustrate the work that we do a little bit more. So let me press play. Okay, so hopefully that video just showed you a little bit more about some of the work we do. You could see there working with local communities, getting them interested in the animals, teaching people to snorkel, going into schools. You can see people doing some media work to help share the work that we do on a bigger scale, and of course people doing research with the animals there as well. So with that, thank you so much for listening to me. Hopefully you're still with us, and I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and we'll go back to Nika.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
I've got a few questions. So
Of
the
course.
first one was, who founded the Manta Trust and when and why?
Sorry, Nika, I'm just trying to still got my screen up in my background. Let me just see if I can get rid of that.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think my video might play again on my screen. Okay, right. I think we're there. Sorry, Nika, what was your question?
Who founded the Manta Trust and when and why?
Who founded the Manta Trust and when and why? So actually, before the Manta Trust, I suppose, came the Maldivian Manta Ray project. And that was founded in 2005 by one of the co-founders of the Manta Trust, Dr. Guy Stevens. And he was working as a marine biologist in the Maldives at the time when he set this project up. So actually, this project came first, this Maldivian Manta Ray project, and it still exists today. It's our flagship project of the Manta Trust. It's where we have a lot of our researchers and educators working out there. And then a little while after that came the Manta Trust. So in 2011, our CEO, Dr. Guy Stevens, and National Geographic photographer Thomas Peshak, they co-founded the Manta Trust together. And that was really as a result of wanting to work on a more global scale and wanting to be able to work with other projects and work with other partners as well worldwide. And so that's how that came about.
Oh wow, so sounds really fun. Maldives sounds amazing. So how many is there a large population of mantas in the Maldives?
Yeah, really large population of mantas in the Maldives. So both species are found there. Reef mantas are encountered more frequently. Again, they are found in shallower water, but the oceanics can also be seen in the more southern atolls as well.
Wow. How many? So you said that baby mantas you usually get one at a time. Is it a possibility to have twins?
It's a possibility. Yeah, they can have twins, but it is much more occasional. It's much more common to just have one pup at once. So, yeah, a female will usually give birth to one pup after a pregnancy of around about a year, just over a year for a reef manta, and then the pup will be in an egg inside the female, and it will hatch inside the egg, and then it will be born live after this pregnancy of about a year. And we haven't actually seen a manta give birth in the wild before, but it has been observed in captivity. And so we do have some details about how it happens. So people often say the babies look a bit like a burrito because they have their pectoral fins, these wings, folded up behind their back when they come out. So it looks a bit like a manta burrito. But yeah, usually just one.
So which part of the manta does it come out of?
I haven't got my picture up anymore, but if you can kind of imagine the underside of the manta, you've got the tail at the bottom, and then just above, you've got something called the cloaca, and the baby will come out of that cloacal opening on the female.
Oh wow. So how big are the babies?
Quite big. So much smaller than an adult. Let's say an adult reef manta, it's going to vary, but maybe 3-4 meters from wingtip to wingtip. That baby is probably roughly, they're all going to be different, but roughly about 1.5 meters from wingtip to wingtip. And to put that in context, I'm quite a small person. I'm about 5 foot tall, and that is roughly my height. So this is quite a big baby.
Wow. Like I saw the fish on their backs, or actually on their bellies as well. Do they bother them, and what are they?
So these fish are called remora. So there's lots of different species of remora, but remora generally are like sucker fish. They've got an adaptation on them that means they can adhere to other fish. So you might find remora on other animals too, other species of shark, for instance, other species of ray. But these remora will kind of stick onto the ray, and it's a symbiotic relationship. And what I mean by that is that it's a long-lasting, very close association with two animals. So they're kind of working together. They've got this very close association. So the remora will kind of hitch a lift, if you like, on the manta ray, and it gets lots of benefits from that. It gets transportation, and it gets protection and shelter, and it gets food. And in return, the manta ray also gets a benefit because the remora will eat parasites off its body, which is also good for the manta ray. So when we have two benefits like that, it's benefiting both the remora and the manta ray. We would call it a mutualistic relationship. It's a mutual benefit, as opposed to, let's say, if it was only benefiting the remora and harming the manta ray, then you would call it a parasitic relationship. It would be a parasite. But here we've got this mutualistic relationship. It's bringing benefit to both the animals by having this relationship. And it's interesting that you ask, can it harm them or can it bother them? Because, I mean, generally people say it doesn't bring harm, but we do see cases of manta rays where once the remora is left, the skin is very red. It might be quite sore looking, might have some open wounds. Smaller remora might try and force the way into the gill openings so they can clean and eat things from inside. And that again can damage those areas if they force their way through. So, I mean, generally it's not thought to harm them, but probably there are probably smaller examples of when they are harmed to a degree or bothered to a degree, certainly.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think I'd like it very much if I was a manta.
True. You said that mantas eat zooplankton, so like how big are they?
Zooplankton. So zooplankton is lots of different species. So it's just another word for very, very small animals living in the water, really. It could be a species of its own. It could be larvae of another animal. Generally very, very small. So kind of maximum size, a couple of millimeters maybe, down to microscopic sizes that we couldn't make out with our bare eye. We'd need a microscope to look at. So tiny animals.
Wow. How can you tell the sex of a manta?
That's a good question. Just wondering if I should try and share my screen again because it's probably nicer to have a look.
Okay.
Just see if I can get you the photo. Let's have a look. Okay, this should appear on your screen now. Let me know if you can't see it.
Got it.
You see that okay? Yeah. So here we're looking at the underside of a manta, and this is kind of our photo ID shot, but usually we can identify the sex this way too. So I'm looking for their reproductive organs, which are down near the tail. So, oh, I've gone too far. So down here, can you see my cursor okay, Nika?
Yeah.
Yeah. So down here on the male, they have these two reproductive organs which just come down from the body. You can just see I'm circling them there, called claspers. And they use those to reproduce, whereas the females wouldn't have those claspers. And generally would just look kind of smoother in this area. So males would have these protruding claspers, females wouldn't. Sometimes it is a bit more difficult. So particularly if you've got a juvenile male, a young male, their claspers wouldn't yet be fully developed. And so they can often look a bit more like female. So, you know, in theory, it looks nice and easy. Sometimes it's a little bit trickier to identify the sex, but yeah, generally you're looking for those presence of claspers for males or absence for females.
That makes sense. What was the next? Oh yeah. Do you ever tag mantas, like to see where they go, or maybe put
Yeah.
a camera on them even?
Yeah, so various researchers have tagged mantas before. It's a really useful research technique. We can gather lots of data from it that we can't gather from, let's say, photo ID. So photo ID is a little bit limited because we can only get photos in areas where humans can access. So that might be areas where we know the mantas definitely are going to be, or areas that are shallow enough that we can snorkel or dive to get our photos. But in other areas that are perhaps deeper, or we're not quite sure where the mantas go, you know, we can't use photo ID for that data. And that's where things like tagging comes in really useful. Tagging, it doesn't happen as frequently as photo ID. The equipment is really, really expensive. And so it's not as accessible. And also it is invasive, whereas photo ID isn't. So it's usually used more as a kind of resort when we don't have any other way of getting that data.
So if mantas go to places like the Maldives, like it's bound to be a lot of tourism, isn't there? So is tourism bad or good for mantas?
That's a really good question. There's no black and white answer to that, really. I couldn't sit here and say, oh, it's bad or it's good. It's probably a little mixture of both of those things. But you're exactly right. If we take the Maldives, for instance, and manta rays are pretty smart, I think, because they only really live in these beautiful kind of tropical and subtropical areas. They live in all the areas that we look at and think, oh, that looks so beautiful. And of course, tourists want to go there, not only because it looks beautiful and it tends to have nice weather, but they go there for the animals a lot of the time too. So if we take the Maldives, it's full of big marine megafauna like manta rays and whale sharks and other things like dolphins as well. And so I suppose the first benefit of tourism, the biggest benefit of tourism, is that tourism brings in an awful lot of money. People are spending a lot of money to go out there to dive or snorkel or swim with these animals. And that money then gets used in that community, in those islands, for instance, in the Maldives, to boost their economy. It also helps to put an economic value on the animals, helps people to see that actually these animals are worth a lot of money to our community. People are coming here and they're spending their money to see them. Helps people to see that actually this animal is worth more money alive than it is dead. It's bringing in this money year after year by being alive. If it was dead, we might get a one-off payment, but here we're getting it every year. And so that's probably the biggest benefit of tourism, is bringing an awful lot of money to these communities. By also having an economic value of the animal, it's helping people realize why they need to protect them as well. So it has this kind of double effect. I suppose most people that go and interact with the animals are responsible, and they do act in a way that you would want them to act. But there's always going to be a handful of people that don't act in the way that you want them to act. So, for every however many people acting exactly how you want, you will get a minority that don't. So you will always get some that want to interact further than they maybe ideally should, try and touch the animal, maybe try and swim after the animal. And those kind of things can cause problems. They might cause the animal to try and avoid that area, move away from the area, disturb the animal in one way or another. So yeah, there's no clear-cut answer. It brings lots and lots of benefits. The majority of people do exactly what they should, and they minimize disturbance, but you will always get some ill effects as well.
Is there maybe a specific type of tourism that would be more beneficial to mantas?
I suppose just by people showing responsible tourism, by being kind of ethical tourists or sustainable tourists, that's kind of what you want. And they could do that in lots of ways. It might be by researching, what they're going to do before they go. So researching the resort they're going to stay with, researching the operators they're going to use for their diving or their snorkeling or whatever they're planning to do, and making sure that those people are acting with kind of the animals and the environment in mind as well. With that note, if anyone listening is planning on a visit, you can go to our website, www.swimwithmantas.org, and we work on this platform to try and make sure that everyone has guidelines that they can follow to act in a responsible way around the animals. So on there's a big kind of 10-step guide of how to act around manta rays so that you know exactly what to do. Also, people like dive operators can sign up on our website as well to say that they are acting as responsible operators, and when they demonstrate that, they also get listed on that website. So if you're wanting to go out there and dive, you can check before you go, actually, who should I dive with? Who's shown that they're going to act appropriately around these animals? And that's a good way to look at it too.
So I assume you have lots of dive operators in the Maldives?
Yeah, it's our biggest base where we work. So we work with a lot of dive operators out there already, a lot of resorts out there already. So yeah, there is quite a list of people on there.
What about in Hawaii?
I can't remember if there's any list in Hawaii, but Hawaii is a big hotspot for mantas, particularly for night snorkeling and night diving with mantas. I can't remember off the top of my head if there's any on there, but have a look and you'll definitely be able to see.
Yeah, great. Yeah, you said night snorkeling. Does light attract mantas?
Yeah, so some places, Hawaii is a good one. Some places will use lights to attract. They're not actually so much attracting the bigger animals like the mantas initially, they're actually attracting the plankton. So by using the light, the plankton will kind of congregate into that column of light. And of course, where there's food, other animals will follow. So by using that light, you can then attract things like manta rays or attract things like whale sharks over to the food. And over time, the likelihood is that animals become conditioned to that. So, the light will actually end up attracting them, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean it's a bad idea to like put a light above the water on a regular basis?
Again, I think that's a really good question. As with everything, probably it just needs to be done with thought and reflection. So, for instance, being cautious about where the lights go. So often many operators will put the light out into the open ocean, but attracting them to an area of the boat might not be a good idea, because of course then you've got things like the propeller that they could injure themselves on. So being cautious about where the light goes. It might also be being kind of aware and mindful about the amount of people that go out into the ocean at night. So what probably started with maybe one operator or two operators becomes more and more popular, and suddenly you might find that you've got hundreds of people in the water to observe these animals in the night. And again, then it's just about making sure that you can you can be aware of what everyone's doing and that they're not disturbing the animals. So it's probably more about how it's managed more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. So would it be a good idea to put it on the edge of a cliff or something, or like close to, like, not a cliff but like a small slope? Is that
You would
dangerous?
want it in an area where the mantas can't injure themselves or anything. So the light is kind of in a nice place of open ocean, if that makes sense. So, they're not going to be banging into anything accidentally or coming up into the light and accidentally hitting themselves on anything that could harm them.
Mm-hmm. So next to the rocks isn't really good.
I suppose it would be where the light is pointing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned gill plates and that they're used in soup. Are they nutritional?
Again, good question. There will be some nutritional value to all things, but there was a study that looked into gill plates and nutritional value. And more worryingly, they found products in it that can actually be quite detrimental. So they found presence of heavy metals, so things like mercury, things like lead, things like arsenic. And these are all things that even in quite small quantities can do quite a lot of damage to the human body, things like our organs, for instance. And of course, if that's ingested more and more often, then it's going to do more harm over time. So not really nutritional, not in any good way, really.
How come the mantas are fine with it then?
Pardon?
How come the mantas are fine with it?
I suppose it's a different, I wouldn't be able to go into the science of this, I suppose, but it's a different way. It's accumulated in their body over time, and it's not been ingested directly into them. It's also a smaller amount in a bigger body as well. It's my best guess. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you said the mantas have to be moving all the time. So does that mean like as soon as they're out of the water, would they die immediately, or do they have some time?
I've been lucky enough that I've never seen this happen, which I'm very grateful for. I don't know how long it would take, how long they'd be out of the water. I suspect just like any fish, a matter of minutes, I would imagine, but that is me guessing. Like I said, I've been lucky enough not to have to observe that.
Mm-hmm. Good, I guess.
Yeah.
It's good to know, but it's good that it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, there will be people, of course, that have seen it that could probably answer, but yeah, I can't.
Yeah. What are manta tails used for?
Again, good question. It's funny that you ask these, because these are things that I often never think about, but really good questions that it's lovely to start thinking about. Tails on animals generally, so tails are often used for things like balance or steering or propulsion. Manta tails don't seem to have a huge function. It might aid in their swimming, so it might help to a degree with them swimming well. But people have observed mantas with very short tails, people have observed mantas without a tail, and they still seem to be able to swim fine. So it doesn't seem to have a big function. They don't have the stinging barb like stingrays do. People often get them confused, but there's no sting on there. So it's just, for all intents and purposes, a tail. Doesn't seem to have a huge function. Might help in swimming, but that is just a might.
Yeah, wow, surprising, really. Um, is it bad to swim with mantas? Because you said you can, but like, is it
Um,
what do you avoid if you do it?
again, it's a question a bit like the one before about swimming with them, in that there's no real answer to it, I suppose. There's no yes or no. there's lots of benefits swimming with mantas brings. We talked all about the economic value and the money that comes to countries by people wanting to come and swim with them. And if that wasn't happening, those countries would lose a lot of money. But equally, it's all about how people do it. So as long as they do it in a very responsible way, small groups, if you went to that Swim with Mantas website and you look at the guidelines, it's all things about approaching them while getting in the water very slowly and quietly, trying not to make splashes with your fins as you swim, approaching them from the side, because at the back they have a blind spot where they can't see, and just generally trying not to spook them, trying not to disturb them. So I suppose there's no right or wrong, it's about trying to do it in a way that minimizes disturbance to the animal.
So if you do go into the water with them and follow all those guidelines, they won't really mind?
I think every individual is different. Some are a little bit more skittish than others. Some seem to be more curious than others. Generally, these guidelines are produced primarily for the benefit of the animal, but they should also benefit the person in the water too, because kind of quieter you are and the stiller you are, the more the mantas tend to hang around. So following these guidelines really should enhance that person's experience too, and that the manta should be there for a longer time generally.
Nice. So is there like a limit to how deep mantas can dive, or how long they can stay?
There was a study on this a couple of years ago, and they were looking into diving behavior of reef mantas. And they did find that actually they dive to really, really great depths. So we're talking hundreds of meters. They were tagging them to look at how deep they would go. And I think all the ones that were tagged would dive regularly down to about 300 meters or more. And a couple of the individuals in the study even reached depths of around about 600 meters. So they do dive really, really far down into the water. In terms of length of dive, again, it differed between individual, but once they were at that very, very low depth, their kind of greatest depth, they didn't tend to stay down there for an awful long time. Some of them were as short as a minute at that greatest depth, and up to maybe around about half an hour before starting to ascend back up. But it does seem to differ between individuals.
How big, like why is one of those big groups of mantas called, and how big do they get?
I wonder there if you mean about when we see them in the big groups and they're feeding. So quite often you might just find mantas on their own, but sometimes you might find them come together in big groups. And if they come together in a group, it's usually either for mating behavior or in very large groups for feeding behavior. So there is a behavior called cyclone feeding, where you might see an awful lot of mantas come together in a big group, and they are swimming very, very fast in circle together, and they are kind of gathering plankton into that space so they can feed on it. And it's a really, really cool thing to watch. There's all sorts of videos online for it. Like if you type in Manta Rays cyclone feeding and have a watch, it's a really cool thing to see.
Wow. I don't know if you can hear thunder, but it's thundering.
No, I can't.
That one's a big one.
Oh, I heard that. I can hear that one now.
Oh wow. Yes, so I saw a video once of I think a manta, I'm not sure if it was, but jumping out of the water. Do they ever do that?
Yeah, so all mobulid species can jump out the water up to usually a couple of meters. It's called breaching. So if you see one jump out, it's breaching. We don't really know why it's done. There's lots of different theories people have put forward to why it's done. Anything ranging from maybe it's a way of getting rid of parasites from the body. But probably a more popular theory is that it's some kind of means of communication, because of course when they come back down they kind of slap the water, and that creates this big sound that can be heard from a long way away, and so it could be a method of communication. And again, it could be for all sorts of things. It might be communicating, feeding to other manta rays. So here's a really great feeding opportunity, come along, join in. It could be directing prey into the group that's feeding. It could be for a mating event. No one's really sure at this point.
Yeah. So does that mean they sort of make a more of a belly flop sort of sound?
Yeah.
Surprising they do that willingly.
I know, it does look a bit like it might hurt. You sometimes see it quite frequently as well, and again, if you see it once, you tend to see it quite often in that same period. So really interesting thing to see.
Strange. You said so there's not really a known reason why, so that's strange. Really. My next question was like, where can mantas be found? You said subtropical and tropical. Like, what would the closest place be in Europe then? Like, if is there a
Um,
place in Europe?
Generally, yeah, if we're talking about manta rays, so I always find it hard to describe where they can be found really, but if you imagine, you imagine your picture of the world map, and you've got the equator running through the middle, and by kind of tropical and subtropical, I'm taking like a big chunk above the equator and a big chunk below the equator. And really globally, if you're looking at both species of manta in that whole kind of belt across the middle of the earth, really. Europe is a bit trickier. So if you look at mobulids as a whole, there is a species of devil ray, the spine-tailed devil ray, which is found in the Mediterranean. Yeah, which is very, very cool. And then if you take particular places in Europe, and the place that's kind of jumping to my mind is the Azores, then again, you may find different species as well. So in the Azores, you've got 2 species of devil ray found there, the one I just mentioned, as well as the sicklefin as well. And the oceanic manta ray can be found there as well. And again, you're just looking at particular times of the year rather than year round. But yeah, so particular places you might find different species to some
Are there
extent.
any in the Atlantic?
So again, depends where in the Atlantic you're talking about.
Yeah. How about Tenerife?
Tenerife, I'm sure I've seen reports of manta rays in Tenerife. Don't quote me on it. It's not my area really. But I'm sure I've seen infrequently, I would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure I've heard about manta rays in Tenerife, but probably infrequently.
Mm-hmm. Are manta rays curious?
Yeah, they can be really curious. So I talked before about how they've got this big brain, really, biggest brain to body size ratio of any fish. And the parts of the brain which are enlarged are thought to be responsible for things like social interaction. So they do show lots of curious behavior, particularly around things like divers and snorkelers. So like I said before, quite often if you're kind of quite quiet in the water and quite still in the water, although we encourage people not to approach a manta ray, you might actually find the manta ray approaches you. So sometimes they will come over and have a good look and see what you are, or occasionally they might investigate things like diver bubbles and all sorts of things like that too. So they definitely seem to have a curious nature about them.
Very cute. It'd be funny to be investigated by a manta.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great experience for your trip.
So, where are the manta's eyes? Like, are they close to their mouth?
The what, sorry?
The eyes of the manta.
The eyes, where are the eyes? So again, I don't have the picture up, but if you can picture the head, it's kind of quite a flat head, quite a long head, and on either side of the head they have their eyes, and they're kind of right behind those cephalic fins in the front of their face.
Wow, strange place. Yeah, that's a bird. Do the mantas have any teeth?
Yeah, I always think they don't really look like teeth as we tend to think about teeth, but they do. They have a few rows of very small, kind of square, blunt teeth, and they're not really used for feeding. We saw how they feed with their gill plates earlier, but actually the primary function of these teeth seem to be used by males for mating. So as they do their kind of courtship routine with the females, one of the things they'll do is they'll hold on to the female using their teeth. And so afterwards, you can sometimes see on the females that they've got mating scars from the teeth of the males, and the researchers can use that to their advantage, because if they see them, they know that's a mature female. So they can start to work out things like how much of that population is made up of mature females. So they can use that to their advantage too.
Strange.
Mm.
Can mantas regulate their body temperatures?
This is an interesting question. It's not one I know an awful lot about, actually. So most fish are ectotherms, which is what a lot of people think of as being cold-blooded, which means that they get their temperature from the environment around them rather than regulating their temperature internally. I know I have read some things before about manta rays and whether or not when they dive to great depths where it's very cold, if they then need to come up to shallower areas for quite a long time to warm their bodies back up. But it's probably not something I could comment on with a great deal of knowledge, I'm afraid.
Do you mind if I ask 3 more questions?
You can go ahead, yeah.
So, can they eat any fish? You said they eat zooplankton, but maybe small fish, would that work?
They really just eat zooplankton. Again, if you think about their kind of gill structure that you saw before, they're really quite fine, quite thin. So, bigger animals aren't going to go through really.
But if a small fish can pass through, would it be eaten?
I don't know how small you're thinking, but really zooplankton, like even very small fish, like larval fish, would still come under this category of zooplankton. They're just like millimeters big, really, but much bigger than that, they're not going to really get eaten. They're just going to they won't pass through the gills.
And how long do the mantas live?
That's a good question. Again, it's going to vary between different species of mobulid. And again, we don't actually really fully know because they've only been studied for a couple of decades, really, in great depth. There's estimates made, maybe around about 40 years would be an estimate, but I don't think anyone can say that with great certainty.
Quite a long life for a mammal.
Yeah. And again, it's a very, if you compare that to other big animals, which are very kind of slow growing, that's quite a common theme, really. They do tend to be the long-lived animals.
Yeah. So, one last question. What effect does climate change have on
It's a really good question, a really important question, because of course this is becoming something more on our minds really every day that passes. It is thought that climate change will have an impact on mantas. It's probably not entirely certain what the impact will be, but certainly it's thought to affect their food source. So we expect probably a decline in zooplankton because of climate change. So it might be harder for them to get enough food. But also, if we take the reef manta, for instance, we haven't really talked much about coral reefs, but reef mantas will spend time on coral reefs because they can be cleaning stations for them. So smaller fish on these reefs will come up and clean them. But coral, you may have heard about, with climate change, we get coral bleaching effects where the coral essentially dies off. And so climate change may actually affect the coral reef and then as a byproduct affect the fish that live there, including manta rays that come to visit as well. So it's probably not an awfully clear picture of what will happen because it's still something that's being researched all the time. It's still something that we're gaining knowledge on all the time, but certainly if so, it will have an impact.
Yeah. I guess that's it then. We reached the end.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jen, for taking the time to join us.
No
It was
problem at
very
all.
exciting and inspirational to learn about mantas, the Manta Trust, your research and conservation work, and most importantly, what we can all do to help.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for watching, and I hope that you will learn from this video just how amazing and unique these gentle giants are, and that we all have to be more responsible to protect and preserve them. Lastly, I hope that some of you will get involved with the Manta Trust work. But yeah, remember to stay responsible, guys, and see you all next time. Bye!
Bye.